is Republican Congressman from Florida, Michael Waltz, along with being projected to win his seat in Florida. Congratulations. He has been a big advisor to Donald Trump and the Trump campaign. Thanks so much for being with us, Congressman. What do you think the one thing was? If you had to point to one thing that was the key to victory for Donald Trump last night, what would you say it was?
Well, John, I think that people were voting on actions and not words or rhetoric. Kamala's campaign was about turning the page, and the American people overwhelmingly chose to turn the page on the failed policies of this administration on the economy, on the border, and on foreign policy, and go back to the policies that worked for their lives. Once-in-a-generation tax reform, border reform, the Abraham Accords that brought peace across the Middle East, minority opportunity zones, justice reform, veterans reform, all the things that President Trump got done despite everything thrown at him. And at the end of the day, people voted on what affects their everyday lives, not a bunch of rhetoric that the media, frankly, likes to obsess on day in and day out, but on what affects their families, what makes them feel safer, what makes them wealthier, what makes them feel like they have a better opportunity for their children, and puts responsibility and power back in the hands of people and families and away from unelected bureaucrats, frankly, in Washington, D.C.
So what do you think?
And it is decisive and overwhelming.
It absolutely was decisive, and we saw the traits of that almost everywhere in the country and not just in the battleground states. I think it is important to recognize that. What do you think the average voter will notice first? How will their lives change? And be specific, if you can. What policy will change their lives first and how?
Oh, I can be especially specific. Right now, the stock market is exploding on anticipation of President Trump's presidency and his economic policies. Just next year, all of the Tax Cut and Jobs Acts were all on the table. And when Harris is endorsing a capital gains tax that would penalize business owners trying to sell their business, when they're talking about unearned income, where I guess some bureaucrat evaluates, your life, when you're talking about everyday taxes for, say, a small business LLC, and then further, you've got a massive trade deal between Mexico and Canada, the USMCA. Those terms are up next year. So all of those things are on the table, but for seniors, for fixed income, for people trying to save, waking up this morning and watching the stock market hit all-time highs, I think this is just day one of a new Trump presidency and turning the page on the failed policies of the last 4 years.
No dispute that the market is happy this morning. I will note the market's way up during the Biden administration, too. People have done really well in the market the last few years. And I will note that investors we're talking to saying that one reason.
But their wages, but the problem was, John,
I'm not arguing.
their wages didn't keep track. When inflation is eating up what they're gaining in the market, then it was a net loss for them, and they voted on that.
Just trying to give context to what you're saying there. I'm not at all disagreeing with what you're saying about what people are excited about, and some investors certainly excited about. One thing I know they're excited about is that the election's over, right? And it's not going into overtime. Uncertainty is something that they would have hated, investors. I do want to ask you, because foreign policy is a big concern of yours. If you're a frontline soldier in Ukraine who's been fighting the Russian invasion for nearly 3 years now, how do you think you would feel?
Well, first, just speaking as a soldier and a veteran, there is at least some form of accountability today for the 13 Gold Star families from Abbey Gate and that despicable, disgraceful withdrawal and how that was conducted that I think was the match that lit both Europe and the Middle East on fire in terms of projecting American weakness. But in Ukraine, you know what that soldier should be thinking about? Finally, we may have an administration that's going to start enforcing the sanctions on Russia. The Ukrainians have been trying to hit Russian energy infrastructure that's fueling the war, yet Russia is selling more oil and gas through China, through India, than it did before the war. That is literally fueling it. The Europeans are having to buy Russian gas again because of the LNG ban here in the United States and because Biden decided to kill Keystone XL. So there is a way to drive this war to an end We can do it economically. We can do it diplomatically. And let's end this war rather than perpetuating it in perpetuity. That Ukrainian soldier is thinking, maybe I'll get out of this trench line sometime in their lifetime with their lives.
What job would you take in a Trump administration?
John, I just got reelected to my district. I'm not going to, the worst thing in the world in Washington is start measuring the curtains. President Trump needs to I hope he gets a little bit of rest, get his team in place, get the agenda going, and whether I can support that agenda from the House or anywhere else, I believe his policies are good for the United States, good for our national security, and good for maintaining America's leadership around the world.
So you're saying there's a chance?
You know what, John, anytime the President of the United States calls and asks you to serve, I think anybody should take it seriously. But right now, I'm thankful to my constituents in Northeast Florida that gave me another chance to serve them.
Congressman Mike Waltz, nice to see you this morning. Thank you very much for your time. We'll talk to you again soon.
All right. Thank you, John.